What's up, fellow emo, pop punk, metalcore music lovers? Matrix here, and you are locked into the Matrix Music Review Podcast, the only place to get your alt-rock music fix. And we are back with the final March Sadness episode. I know I originally told you guys that we were going to break it down region by region in terms of podcasts, but unfortunately that's just not how it was able to work out this year. But we'll look at it again for next year and when we do some of these other brackets potentially in the future. So today what we're going to do is we're going to go through the last three regions, go through all the matchups, talk about all of the reasons why I picked what I did. And at the end, we will have our March Sadness champion. If you like what you hear and you want to keep up with us, best way to do that is on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok at Matrix Music Review. You can follow us over there. If you're listening on Apple Music or Spotify, please leave a 5-star review, leave us a comment, let me know how I'm doing, let me know if there's anything you want me to review in the future. We had a huge drop. I'm recording this on Friday. I think I have 6 albums technically that I want to at least listen to and potentially review, so next week's podcast is going to be absolutely massive in terms of what we have on it. Can't wait to do that. And as I always do, make sure that you are sharing this podcast with friends, family, coworkers, dogs, whoever's in your life that you think may need a new podcast or likes alt-rock music. Let's continue to grow our little community of alt-rock music lovers. So with that, we are going to jump right into the Red Bull region of March Sadness. Now look, this region is potentially one of the hardest regions I had to look at and had to consider. We start out knowing that Simple Plan, no pads, no helmets, just balls, and Taking Back Sunday, Tell All Your Friends, had buys. Those are 2 absolutely dynamite albums. They are albums that are scene staples, and they're going to be tough to compete with. They're definitely going to be tough to compete with, so it was interesting to see how the bracket fell on this one. So starting out, we had our first matchup, round 1, matchup 1, which was Week's End by Emery versus Can't Stop, Won't Stop by The Maine. And I think this is one of those matchups that I talked about in the previous region where it's a lot closer than you may think it would be, but at the end of the day for me, the better sound, the better nostalgia, the better overall scene, I don't want to say stability, but the scene longevity, I guess is how I'll refer to it, means that I got to give this one to The Maine with Can't Stop, Won't Stop. That album definitely got The Maine kind of front and center, and they've been all around the scene for years, and especially with their new album last year, being on tour with Fall Out Boy, I think it's undeniable the impact that The Maine has had, and it started all right there with Can't Stop, Won't Stop. So that album is moving on to round 2, and we will move on to round 1, matchup 2, which will be The Emptiness by Alesana versus Viva La Cobra from Cobra Starship. And look, guys, this is Alesana very simply for me. I think Viva La Cobra is fine, but I think this album suffers the same fate as Against the Current did last time around, where for me, it's just not the right album, right? Like, this is just not the right album to use in this bracket. Now, if this would have been their second album, I think I probably would have went with Cobra Starship, but I think this one just didn't have enough behind it to get it over the hump, and that's why Alesana is moving on to round 2. Round 1, matchup 3, Is a Boy by Say Anything versus What to Do When You Are Dead by Armor for Sleep. And this is where the conversation gets interesting for me, because personally, I think Say Anything wins this in a landslide. And the reason that I say this is because Say Anything is one of those bands that has just got such a uniqueness about them that we've never seen in the scene before, and that the scene to this day still has not seen. I feel like they kind of paved the way to be extremely different and, you know, in a sense, extremely weird, and make it that much more acceptable. You know, I think we have bands today like 100 gecs and even to some extent People Are Ugly, which may have drawn influence from a band like Say Anything, where their style wasn't the classic pop punk sound. Their style wasn't the classic hard rock, metalcore, emo-ish stuff that was out at that time, but people clearly related to it, and people clearly fucked with it, to be honest. I mean, it's the only way I can say it here is like, clearly people fucked with it because we're doing a anniversary tour for that album this year, and it was met with huge success in terms of people being stoked for it and ready to go out and check it out. So I think that's one of the things when I'm doing this exercise is when I go back and I look at some of these albums, I'm like, damn, I didn't realize that, Say Anything was as popular as they were, and as popular as they are nowadays as well. I mean, obviously they're releasing new singles. I think I Vibrator just came out, which is just an absolutely wild track. I mean, and that just kind of goes to show the uniqueness that Say Anything has in their repertoire, because ain't nobody else out there doing what Say Anything does. So in this respect, in this matchup, Is a Boy by Say Anything, moving on to round 2. Round 1, matchup 4, we have Let Go by Nada Surf versus Finer Things by State Champs. This was one that I had a little bit of difficulty with because I didn't realize Nada Surf was what they were. I had heard the name. I know I have listened to them in the past, but I mean, it's been years since I've listened to this band. And so I go back and I listen to this album and I said, shit, I really enjoyed this album. I remember this album being something that I connected with. But for me, at the end of the day, in terms of lasting impact on the scene, which is one of our criteria that we talked about at the beginning of this, I think Finer Things by State Champs has to be the pick here. State Champs is a band that's always been around the scene, always been, kind of on that, like, second wave almost of the scene, where we have people that, obviously, the Fall Out Boys and the Panics got us up to, like, early 2010s before they kind of started to twist and go towards the more, pop friendly, when we got like Centuries from Fall Out Boy, we got High Hopes from Panic, where people started to say like, this, I don't know how I feel about this. I don't know if this is something that I'm really interested in. But then we have a band like State Champs come out and it's like, all right, the scene's still there. It's just a little different now. And we have different bands that we have to look to for that. So State Champs moving on to round 2 in this matchup. Round 1, matchup 5, we have They're Only Chasing Safety by Under Oath versus Constellations by August Burns Red. This one for me was very simple. This is an Under Oath advance, and it's not even close. And the reason I say that is because They're Only Chasing Safety is one of those albums that has kind of transcended time for me. I mean, I think it's one of those albums that kind of introduced me to the scene, introduced me to this sound of music, this particular type of music, and I think without it, it doesn't have the same effect. Without it, the scene doesn't have the same effect, and I think that's true for a lot of people. When I hear people talk about, favorite albums from that time, They're Only Chasing Safety is right up there. So definitely one that needs to move on to the next round. And then our last matchup of the first round is Want by 303 versus All American Rejects, self-titled. And fuck, I mean, I have no idea what to do here. I think this is one that has definitely been really difficult for me, because what people don't understand is that the All American Rejects self-titled album is not the album that really catapulted them into scene fame. That came on the next album when we had tracks that made it to the mainstream, like Move Along, Dirty Little Secret, things like that. But they started to kind of dip their toe into the mainstream here with Swing Swing, and 303 is another one of those bands, like I said before, with Say Anything. They're just kind of a band that really laid the groundwork for 100 gecs and other bands that we've seen nowadays that are a little different. They have a little bit of a different sound. And yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't know that there's a wrong pick here, but I think in terms of longevity and overall scene staples, when you look at it, All American Rejects deserves to move on more than 303 does, and that is such a difficult decision to make, such a difficult call, but I think for me at this point, it makes sense to say All American Rejects move on to round 2, eliminating Want by 303. That puts us into round 2, and the first matchup in round 2 is Tell All Your Friends by Taking Back Sunday versus Can't Stop, Won't Stop by The Maine. And guys, this is one that has a little bit of difficulty to it, but at the end of the day, you take Taking Back Sunday to move on to round 3, and I think everybody can agree with that. Taking Back Sunday with this Tell All Your Friends album is one of those that is iconic. It is one that was added late to When We Were Young Fest, so I wasn't even sure that it was going to be on this bracket, but I'm glad that it is. I'm glad that it's getting its flowers, and we're going to push it right through. Round 2, matchup 2 is Alesana versus Say Anything, and I'm going to put Say Anything through to the next round. I know that might be met with a little bit of criticism, but Is a Boy is really a different album. It is an album that is one of those right on the cusp of being a scene staple. I think if Say Anything had a little bit more mainstream success, we'd see it in that category for me. But I think at this point, in that particular matchup, Say Anything, Is a Boy is moving on to round 3. Round 2, matchup 3 is No Pads, No Helmets, Just Balls by Simple Plan versus Finer Things by State Champs. This one is very easy for me. This is Simple Plan moving on. That album is unreasonably good. It is unreasonably packed with things that are just timeless classics. So No Pads, No Helmets, Just Balls is moving on to the third round. And then our final matchup is They're Only Chasing Safety by Under Oath versus the All American Rejects self-titled. And this one for me, again, I feel like it's a little bit easier for me personally, but Under Oath is moving on. It's a very difficult call, but at the same time, I think Under Oath's album just has a little bit more to it than this All American Rejects self-titled does. So Under Oath moving on to round 3. In round 3, our first matchup is Taking Back Sunday versus Say Anything. This is where it gets a little easier in terms of the Say Anything argument. Taking Back Sunday beats them in a landslide in terms of albums for this. Tell All Your Friends is just too iconic, and Is a Boy just doesn't have the stamina to keep up with it, unfortunately. In round 3, matchup 2, to determine who faces Taking Back Sunday for a chance in the Final Four, is Simple Plan versus Under Oath. And this is not easy, but I'm going to give it to Simple Plan. I think Simple Plan is a band that really is extremely undervalued. I think everybody just kind of considers them the I'm just a kid guys that, that's all they got, or they're the guys that do the Scooby-Doo soundtrack or whatever it may be. But when you look at Simple Plan, especially this album is jam-packed with hits that you probably have been screaming for the past 15, 20 years. So in this sense, Simple Plan, No Pads, No Helmets, Just Balls is moving on to face Tell All Your Friends by Taking Back Sunday to determine who moves on to the Final Four and gets a lovely chance to face My Chemical Romance and Black Parade. And so for the Red Bull region, this is such a difficult conversation because both of these albums are iconic. Tell All Your Friends by Taking Back Sunday is timeless. No Pads, No Helmets, Just Balls by Simple Plan is packed with scene staple hits. Again, is there a wrong choice here? Probably not. Am I going to be told that I made the wrong choice? Absolutely. No matter which way I go, you guys are going to tell me that I did it wrong. But when I take a step back and I look at this and I look at what the criteria was, lasting impact, nostalgia, just overall scene staple, scene stability, I think I have to give it to Tell All of Your Friends by Taking Back Sunday. And that honestly pains me to say that because I am putting an album through to the Final Four that is basically knocking out an album that has on it I Do Anything, I'm Just a Kid, Addicted, Perfect, Grow Up, all songs that are still to this day being played. They're dominating on TikTok. They're dominating on Reels. It's always a song that you hear. But I still think when we look at the overall totality of this scene, Taking Back Sunday and Tell All Your Friends had a little bit larger of an impact. I think Simple Plans came just a little too early. And I think with Taking Back Sunday being right at the height with this album, I think it makes a lot of sense that they are moving on. They are the winners of the Red Bull region, and they will face My Chemical Romance and Black Parade in the Final Four for a chance at the finals. And I'm going to do that final matchup right here, and we're going to discuss Black Parade versus Tell All Your Friends. Again, not an easy decision, but for me, Black Parade moves on. Black Parade is an album that really, I mean, what else is there to say about Black Parade by My Chemical Romance that hasn't been said already, right? Like, this is an album that most people consider the most special album of that time, the most special album in the scene. There's a reason that all the jokes when we joke about the emo national anthems, it's Black Parade. Like, there's a lot of different things that make this album special, not just those specific songs that everybody knows. But in this sense, moving on to the final is Black Parade by My Chemical Romance, eliminating Tell All Your Friends by Taking Back Sunday. So now we will move on to the other side of the bracket, and we're going to talk about the Journeys region. This region is wild because this region has a lot of difficult first round matchups, but I feel like once we get through those, it becomes a little clearer. So the Journeys region has buys for A Lesson in Romantics by Mayday Parade and Page Avenue by Story of the Year. These are both absolutely monster albums to talk about. So we'll get to those in their first matchups when they get there. But for round one, matchup one, we're going to talk about Sticks and Stones by New Found Glory versus The Silence in Black and White by Hawthorne Heights. And damn it, here we go again with these matchups that are a toss-up. I mean, that's really what this is. New Found Glory is another band that I feel is extremely, I don't want to say disrespected, but I think they're a band that's extremely forgotten and extremely underrated in terms of what they did for the scene. Hawthorne Heights, you already know what their contributions to the scene are, and you know how important Ohio is for lovers is. But having said all of that, for me, Sticks and Stones by New Found Glory is going to move on because the album itself is overall better than The Silence in Black and White by Hawthorne Heights. When we move to round one, matchup two, we have the self-titled We the Kings versus Color Me in Kindness by Basement. And look, for me, this one's really easy. This is a We the Kings landslide, another band that I feel like is a little forgotten in terms of what they had out at this time, and really happy to see them, back on stage performing this album and reminding everybody of why they were so good back in that time. Round one, matchup three, we have Chroma by Cartel versus Let's Cheers to This by Sleeping with Sirens. And I'm going to say it right out front, this is a big time upset because I am going with Chroma by Cartel as the winner in this matchup. Look, I get it. Sleeping with Sirens is such an influential band, and Kellen Quinn himself is, I mean, I don't even know that there are words to describe what he has meant to the scene and what that person has meant to the scene overall. But Chroma by Cartel it's a special album, man. I mean, it is such a special album, and it's a special band. To be able to go back and listen to that, it really reminded me how much fun I had with that album and with that band in general. So only fair to move them on to the next round, and really tough matchup there with Sleeping with Sirens, but at the end of the day, I'm going to go with Cartel. In round one, matchup 4, we have The New Romance by Pretty Girls Make Graves versus Discovering the Waterfront by Silverstein. I don't have a lot to say about either of these two albums, but I will say that Discovering the Waterfront by Silverstein is going to move on to the next round. I think it's a little bit stronger. I think both are solid albums, but these are two albums that, again, I just really don't have much to say about. I think neither of them really are... it's a toss-up. Neither of them really have anything wrong with them, but at the end of the day, I just liked Silverstein's album better. Round 1, matchup 5, we have Stay What You Are by Saves the Day versus Cash Only by Millionaires. For me, this one saves the day. I never really got that into Millionaires, and going back and listening to this album again, I wasn't really into it for whatever reason. I think that they are a fun band. I think it's a fun time, but I think for me, Saves the Day had the better album in this particular matchup. And our last matchup of round 1 in the Journeys region is All's Well That Ends Well by Chiodos versus Feel Something by Movements. And this is where it gets fun because I am pushing Chiodos through. It's a more influential album, and Chiodos is a band that is so tied to the scene, even though they are not around right now, that when we saw this announcement at When We Were Young Fest, it made everybody stop in their tracks because this is one of those moments that says, holy shit, what is going on? Because we haven't heard from Chiodos in a while. We thought it was dead, and here we are performing All's Well That Ends Well. But Chiodos moving on to round 2. And in round 2, our first matchup is Mayday Parade, A Lesson in Romantics versus Sticks and Stones by New Found Glory. I don't know that you have a more iconic album in the scene than A Lesson in Romantics by Mayday Parade. This album is flawless from top to bottom, and while New Found Glory, Sticks and Stones is really good, I don't think it's a chance or it stacks up to Mayday Parade in this sense, so Mayday Parade is going to move on to round 3. Our second matchup in round 2 is the self-titled We the Kings versus Chroma by Cartel. And this is where the one-round Cinderella story for Cartel ends because We the Kings is going to move on here. I think, if you question what this We the Kings self-titled album was, just take a step back and say to yourself, we had songs like Check Yes Juliet and Skyway Avenue on the same album at the same time that everybody was screaming, run, baby, run. Don't ever look back. It's hard not to push that album through. So we're going to push We the Kings through to round 3. Third matchup is Story of the Year, Page Avenue versus Discovering the Waterfront by Silverstein. For me, this is a Story of the Year victory. Page Avenue is one of those albums, again, that just has such an iconic aura around it. And, you don't get albums that you can perform 20 years later and go on 20-year celebration tours without having just this immense dedication from your fans to it, and that's what Story of the Year is doing with Page Avenue. So Page Avenue moving on to round 3. And our last round 2 matchup is Saves the Day versus Chiodos, and again, this is an easy victory for me for Chiodos. I think they are one of those bands that is just too timeless, and they're a band that everybody wants back. So moving Chiodos on to round 3, where our first matchup is Mayday Parade, A Lesson in Romantics versus the self-titled We the Kings. This is where We the Kings stops in their tracks and Mayday Parade moves on. Just a more iconic and timeless album, and very easy for me to move Mayday Parade on here. And then the second and last matchup of round 3 is Page Avenue by Story of the Year versus All's Well That Ends Well by Chiodos. Guys, I'm going another big upset here, and I am pushing Chiodos through to the next round. I was baffled by it myself when I wrote it down, when I made it make sense, but when I look back, Story of the Year really hasn't stopped. Right? Story of the Year has always been around. They've always been releasing music. And the music that they've been releasing has always been scene or scene adjacent. We last heard from Chiodos, I believe, around like 2019, when basically we were told it's never going to happen again. It fizzled out. There's all these things that basically told us that Chiodos was done and that it just wasn't going to work. And I think one of the things that makes Chiodos such a influential band for me is just that this album became such a landmark album in terms of what the scene could be like and what the scene should be like for years to come. I mean, when Chiodos finished with this album, it was kind of right at the height, and everybody was just clamoring for more and more Warped Tour, more of these albums. And I look at what we have right now in the scene, and I think it's kind of the same thing. Everybody's banging the table saying that they want more Warped Tour. They want Warped Tour back. And, everybody's banging the table for when we get these nostalgic albums. And so when we have a band like Chiodos that's flirting with a return, I mean, how the hell do you not get excited for that? I mean, I'm sitting here saying to myself, there's no way, right? Like, there's no way that Chiodos actually comes back and gives us new music, right? But never say never. I mean, I don't think I ever in my life thought that Yellowcard would be back making new music, touring again. And last year they did it. So Chiodos is going to move on to the final round to face Mayday Parade for a chance at the Final Four. But unfortunately, their Cinderella run is going to end there because A Lesson in Romantics is just too damn good. It's just too good. A Lesson in Romantics has these songs on it that just make it too good. Everybody knows Jamie All Over. Everybody knows Miserable at Best. But even when you dig a little deeper, Jersey, Black Cat, those are all albums or all songs that they're just fun and everybody knows them. So Mayday Parade moving on to the Final Four, where they will face the winner of the Monster bracket. And for the Monster region, this is another region. This one's a little bit lighter. We have buys from Pierce the Veil and A Day to Remember. The round matchups are pretty simple, I think. Round one matchup one, this first one, we have Good Apollo on Burning Star 4 by Coheed and Cambria versus Still Searching by Senses Fail. For me, that's a pretty simple and easy victory for Senses Fail. I love Coheed. I love what they're about, but I just don't think that Coheed has been as influential or as around the scene as Senses Fail has. Round one, matchup two over in the Monster region, we have Coral Fang by the Distillers versus Say It Like You Mean It by the Starting Line. The Starting Line is another one of those bands that's extremely underrated, so I'm going to go with the Starting Line here and give them the victory and move them on to the next round, where they will face the winner of this matchup, which is Enemy of the World by 4 Year Strong versus Hold On Tight by Hey Monday. This is a difficult matchup because 4 Year Strong is very, very good, and Hey Monday was absolutely iconic. And Hey Monday is a band that just, I don't even know how to say it, but they just kind of disappeared on us, right? Like, obviously we know that Cassidy Pope went on to be on The Voice and win The Voice and then have a country career. And now she's back and in the scene and making solo music. So, I have to question kind of where Hey Monday's trajectory is going to be. And Hold On Tight is such a fun album, and I think that I would do it a disservice if I didn't move it on. So I'm going to take Hey Monday over 4 Year Strong. Really hurts to do that, but Hey Monday moving on to the next round. In round one, matchup 4, we have Don't You Fake It by the Red Jumpsuit Apparatus versus Curse by Atreyu. And for me, Red Jumpsuit Apparatus moves on very easily. I think Atreyu is a band that's very scene adjacent, whereas the Red Jumpsuit Apparatus just kind of hasn't been around for a while. So I am going to go with Red Jumpsuit Apparatus here. I think they've always kind of just been in music, but that time for them with this album was very much so in the scene. Round one, matchup 5, we have Dusk and Summer by Dashboard Confessional versus In Love and Death by The Used. This is this is hard because again, this is one of those first round matchups that you just kind of have to like shake your head and say, I don't think there's a wrong choice here, but I think for me, I'm going to go with Dashboard Confessional. And guys, I don't have a reason why. I really don't. I think these two albums are so good that I don't know that I'm going to be able to explain why I picked it, because this one is just such a toss-up for me. But Dusk and Summer by Dashboard Confessional, moving on to round 2. And our last matchup of round 1 is Full Collapse by Thursday versus Life's Not Out to Get You by Neck Deep. Neck Deep is moving on here. Neck Deep's a band, again, I have a lot of these bands that I really do feel like are very underrated, underappreciated in the scene, and Neck Deep fits that even to this day. You guys know I loved their new album this year that they put out, but they have always been kind of on that level of where everything they've put out has really been good, but somehow, some way, they're just still underrated, and that doesn't make sense. So I'm moving Neck Deep on to round 2. Round 2, our first matchup is Pierce the Veil, Collide with the Sky versus Senses Fail. And this one's really easy for me. This is Pierce the Veil all the way. That Collide with the Sky album is really, really fun. And it's still got some longevity to it even today. So Pierce the Veil moving on to round 3. Round 2, matchup 2, we have The Starting Line versus Hey Monday. And guys, I'm going to do it again. I'm going to move Hey Monday along. I like The Starting Line. I like that album, but I think Hey Monday's album just was a little bit better. And I think it's hard not to fall in love with Hey Monday all over again when you go back and listen to these songs and listen to this album. And that's exactly what happened for me. I went back and I listened to this album, and I was right back in 2008 with this album. And it's kind of crazy to be able to feel something like that, you know, what are we now, 15, 16 years later at this point? And that's what the mark of a great album is the ability to go back to it 10, 15, 20 years down the road and say, shit, that's still making me feel the same way it did when I was, you know, in 8th grade and rocking out to it. So, Hey Monday, hold on tight, moving on to round 3. Round 2, matchup 3, we have A Day to Remember, Homesick versus the Red Jumpsuit Apparatus. This one is a tough one, but I think for me, Homesick by A Day to Remember is such a important album to the scene that it has to move on here. And then our last matchup in round 2 is Dashboard Confessional versus Neck Deep. And I'm moving Neck Deep on here. And that might surprise some people, because I think, to me, Neck Deep has been more influential and more stable in the scene than Dashboard Confessional is. I mean, I gotta be honest, I really haven't been too high on what's come from Dashboard Confessional lately. I feel like it really hasn't fit sonically with what I'm looking for. So, you know, in terms of longevity, I don't think they've had as much as I would have liked them to or as I expected them to, and I think Neck Deep has. So I'm going to move them on to round 3. So round 3, matchup 1, we have Pierce the Veil versus Hey Monday. My Cinderella story is coming to an end with Hey Monday. I cannot in good faith put them through to the next round. So Pierce the Veil, Collide with the Sky is going to move on. It's just more of an iconic album. Hey Monday's had a great run there, but Pierce the Veil's got to move on to the finals in this monster region. And in the finals, they're going to face the winner of A Day to Remember versus Neck Deep. And for me, Homesick by A Day to Remember is going to win this every day of the week. Love Neck Deep, love what they're about, but Homesick is just too good not to put into the final of the monster region. And now we have A Day to Remember versus Pierce the Veil. And this is where I say fuck, because I don't know that I want to make a decision here. Like, I really don't want to fucking make this call, because this is exactly why I made a bracket, because everything in me is telling me that this is a Pierce the Veil win. But I can't help but shake this feeling that A Day to Remember should move on, because when we look at it, that Collide with the Sky album from Pierce the Veil, are we just all about King for a Day? Or is the entire album gonna beat out the entire album of Homesick? And I am gonna say it, I'm moving Homesick by A Day to Remember on. I don't like doing it. I don't like it at all. I don't feel good about it. Not one bit. I really don't. But I'm moving A Day to Remember on to the final four. Sorry to pierce the veil. Collide with the Sky is such a fun album. It's such a good album. I got to move Homesick on. I think Downfall of Us All, if it means a lot to you, it's just too important. Those two songs are just too important to the scene, and I can't not move them on to the final four. And in their final four matchup, they get to face A Lesson in Romantics by Mayday Parade. And unfortunately, all of that deliberation that I just did was a whole lot of nothing, because A Lesson in Romantics is moving on to the finals to face Black Parade. It's just too iconic. And now here comes the really fun part. You know, you thought my deliberation a few minutes ago with Pierce the Veil and A Day to Remember was good. Get ready for this, because I am not ready to have this conversation. Black Parade by My Chemical Romance versus A Lesson in Romantics by Mayday Parade for the March Sadness Championship and the best album that will be performed at When We Were Young Fest 2024. When you look at this, you have two very distinct albums. Black Parade is an album that is very much emo to its core. You have the scene staples with Welcome to the Black Parade and Teenagers. You look at A Lesson in Romantics by Mayday Parade. This is pop punk at its core, at its finest. This is what bands use to build their own sound nowadays. Mayday Parade has their scene staples with Jamie All Over and Miserable at Best. Can't use that argument because they both have two. Can't use that they're the best at what they do because they're both really good at what they do. My Chemical Romance does emo better than anybody else, and I think Mayday Parade does pop punk better than anybody else. This is hard. This is really, really hard because I'm trying to come at this as a critic and as trying to be as unbiased as I can and not put personal feelings into this. And I think if I'm being honest and I'm being as fair as I can be, and if I look at what most of the general public would say, or what we want and what we've been clamoring for as a scene, I think the March Sadness winner and best album at When We Were Young Fest 2024 is Black Parade by My Chemical Romance. I don't say that lightly. I think it's a incredible album, A Lesson in Romantics. I think all 57 of these albums that are going to be performed in full at When We Were Young Fest are great in their own ways. But at the end of the day, My Chemical Romance and Black Parade is always going to be an album that stands out and stands above the rest simply because it changed music. It changed scene music. It gave us a scene. I think for me, even people that weren't or didn't consider themselves scene kids at the time still absolutely loved Black Parade. Welcome to the Black Parade. Teenagers. They loved everything about it. And I think that, for me, is what pushes this album over the edge and gives it the edge over A Lesson in Romantics, because I think unless you really were a scene kid back in those days, Mayday Parade wasn't on your radar. Mayday Parade was not a band that was jumping off the page at you because you just weren't around it all the time. And I think back to kind of my high school experience, right? Which was, my high school was very much a hip-hop, rap, R&B, pop-sounding high school in the sense of what everybody listened to and what was popular. But even so, every person knew and loved Welcome to the Black Parade. Every person knew and loved Teenagers. But when I look back, I don't remember many people talking about Mayday Parade at all, if anyone. And I think for me, that kind of solidifies the fact that Welcome to the Black Parade, Teenagers, and the overall album, Black Parade by My Chemical Romance, is the top album and should be the top album for this March Sadness bracket. So what did you guys think? This was not an easy task. It was a lot harder than I expected it to be. It was a lot of fun. Don't get me wrong. I had a blast doing this for you guys. It was something that I had been working on and thinking about for a while now. And I think it's just fun to always look back and fun to go back and revisit some of these albums. I hope you guys did the same thing. Let me know who won your bracket. The bracket is still up and live. If you want to fill one out, please go ahead to the link in the description of this episode and fill yourself out a bracket. Let me know who your champion is. And we're going to do more of these brackets in the future. I love doing this. This was a lot of fun, and I think you guys liked it a lot as well. It seems to be doing well on everything that I posted on, and it seems to be something that people are interested in. And, maybe that'll fall off after the March Madness time, but we're going to do a couple, see what happens, give you guys some more things to think about. I think the next one that we do is probably going to be a specific band and what song is their best song, and maybe we'll have some deep cuts, make a strong run in there or something like that. But in the meantime, I hope you guys enjoyed March Sadness. Our champion is Black Parade by My Chemical Romance. Go ahead over to Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok and follow Matrix Music Review at Matrix Music Review. If you're listening to me on Spotify or Apple Music, leave a 5-star review. Leave me a comment. Let me know what you thought of March Sadness. And if you want some more brackets in the future, if you have any ideas, more than happy to do that for you guys. And as I always do, I'm going to ask that you please share this podcast with your friends, family, co-workers, sisters, brothers, uncles, whoever you have in your life that may like alternative music, may need a new podcast. Introduce them to Matrix Music Review, and let's continue to grow our little community of music lovers and make the scene a much better place to be. With that, I'm wrapping up this podcast. You guys will catch me very soon with a new review podcast. We got a bunch to talk about, including the new 408 album, which is an absolute banger. Until then, I will see you guys later.